welcome to the show. Tom, you can unmute. Welcome to Thursday Theory. Esha's running a little late, but we've found one of her articles to just have a browse through while we wait for her. She's going to be in about half an hour. So instead of waiting, we just thought we'd start. Tom, what time is it for you?
This is 5:37 a.m. It is. This is a demonstration of my dedication, of course.
Nice.
And unlike Sammy, who actually has an excuse, I am actually here anyway.
Sammy was meant to be on the show, but he was I've just gone out. There you go. That's how much Sammy respects being on his own podcast show. Esha will be joining us during. Tom, is it still snowing in Beijing?
No, it lasted for like one day. It was really funny actually because I posted a picture of it on, I think it was Twitter, of the snow. Really deep. It was like a foot deep. There was all in videos, wasn't there, of kids having snowball fights and stuff in Beijing. Mm-hmm. And then immediately some article sprung up from some right-wing lunatics saying will this cold snap mean the end of China's energy security or some bullshit like that. I can't even remember what the title was. And somebody had sent it to me one day after I posted the picture, and the majority of the snow had melted within 24 hours of it snowing, because it had gone really warm again, and it's remained warm since then. So that article was it lasted, the context of that article literally lasted for less than 24 hours. So it's probably quite funny because it probably took them longer to write that and get it published than it was actually relevant for.
Well, it's quite a good metaphor for most US propaganda, right? That it just melts away like into nothing every time, right?
Say that again. Sorry, my connection's not fantastic here.
I said it's exactly like US. It's a good metaphor for US propaganda, right? It just melted away, just like the snow.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, let's get this article. What's it about? You find it. NATO, government by organised mob. What
do you want to do? Do you want to do paragraph by paragraph, or do you want to read it, or I'm easy?
I'll start, yeah, sure. You can see the screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's find out. I'm going in completely blind to this. You know what it is, Tom. I've not even had a chance to research it, so, Anyway, let's get into this. This is by Esha, of course. On April the 4th, 1949, a bunch of countries in Western Europe and North Africa signed a treaty. In that treaty, there was a provision in Article 5 that stated, the parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America should be considered an attack against all of them, and consequently, they agree that if such an armed attack occurs, each of them, in exercise of the right of individual or collective self-defense recognised by Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations, will assist the party or parties so attacked by taking forthwith, individually and in concert with other parties, legal language about going to war, such action as it is deemed necessary, including the use of armed force to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area. That's
I mean, before we move on, I mean, it's worth pointing out that this was the article that was literally stated and used as casus belli by George Bush when he invaded Afghanistan, I believe. Yeah, it was Afghanistan following the 9/11 freedom fighter attack. I refuse to call it a terrorist attack. And as a result of that, Afghanistan as a state did not declare war on the USA. It did not use state party actors to attack the USA, but the USA used this article, which doesn't even apply, to commit genocide against the Afghan people. That we've just seen the culmination of 20 years later when they got turfed out by the very Taliban they sought to defeat, which is hilarious in more ways than one. But it's just hilarious, isn't it, that they've got all this legal bullshit. In what way is Afghanistan attacking the security of the North Atlantic area. Like, you know, in any reasonable reading of that paragraph, you can't say to yourself, Afghanistan was a threat to like every single country within the North Atlantic area. Like France and the UK were all at risk of like being attacked by Afghan Air Force fucking fighter jets or something. It's so ridiculous, but no one even questions it because they just say, oh, we enacted Article 5 and now we get to go.
I think people do question it, but since world history, since post-Victorian, so post-World War One, right, the time that the US took over the mantle, nobody's been powerful enough to stop them doing this. This is why they can get this stuff all legally passed, because, you know, as that whoever, you know, wields the sword makes the laws, right? It's that, isn't it? It's just that. So nobody can hold them to account because they can just do this. They could just go, the Gulf, we got attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin, right? They didn't have to do anything. Slowly over the last since the end of World War II, I guess, we've seen, just because of the information age and stuff, that inability, they've gone from being able to fake an attack, a military attack, to justify a war, to not being able to Juan Guaido not being able to get over a fence, right?
It's quite amazing how quickly the American hegemony is kind of disintegrated, really. I mean, they only really had 20 years of unipolarity following the kind of collapse of the USSR, where they were the undisputed world leader, the world champion, the world policeman, everything like that. Like every other kind of world hegemon throughout history has always had a much longer kind of stint at the top. I mean, the British did when they had the empire. I mean, like, you know, the Mongols had a longer stint at the top than but
there's a big difference. There's a big difference between the British Empire and the New Age. I mean, it's not even. I guess it's the continuation, isn't it? The Anglo Empire, modern Anglo Empire, compared to the former Anglo Empire, right? Because the British Empire weren't teaching Indians to read or providing education or anything, but because we're living in a different age now. It's just completely different, isn't it? Because we have a working class who are educated to a certain point, to the point where they can understand words, right, and concepts, which wasn't the case 100 years ago. It just proves that capitalism to be productive enough to sustain itself, right? It has to maintain people in complete destitution, doesn't it? The same way that, like, you know, all these countries on the edge of the imperial core get treated, because I mean that's kind of the best way to look at it, isn't it? Look how the imperialists treat people out on the edge of the colonies, where nobody can actually do anything about it, and then you see their true intention rather than how it is at home. But the more that they have given to people at home, the more that's filtered down through the proletariat, the global proletariat, to the fringes of the empire, right? And now people can see, and you know, these fringes of the empire, because their utilization of technology, because of their self-determination, right? You know, if I want to be connected to the world, I'm going to make sure I'm connected to the world, right? Nobody can stop me from doing that. The USA is like spinning plates, isn't it? It can't spin all the plates at once, and it only takes one plate to go for it to smash and never be able to be spun again. So it's a bit like that, isn't it? The more that the third world becomes connected to the imperial core, the less chance the US has of getting away with what it was doing. Like I mentioned earlier, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, for example. They just do that, and then they can just write in the New York Times, this is what happened, and this is the story, and we're not even going to look into it any further, because, you know, we haven't got anyone from the other side being given a platform, let alone the ability to even report it, right? That's the point I'm trying to make. But now Maduro can go on Twitter and be like, yeah, some fishermen caught these Americans trying to invade Venezuela, right? And show them to the world. That's how it's become, hasn't it? So
I think this is why, like, when the Chinese media holds up a mirror so much to the USA now, and like you just see the reaction of like all the Americans on Twitter, for example, when like one of these Chinese state-run media accounts.
RT as well in this.
Yeah, absolutely.
RT are the originals at this. All they do is hold up a mirror to the West, right?
Absolutely, but I mean, I think the very fact that America had to coin the term wolf warrior diplomacy to define them getting roasted by Chinese.
And have you seen the Wolf Warrior films?
No, I haven't actually.
They're not bad. I mean, they're no cheesier than a Jean-Claude Van Damme film or any other American action movie. It's just a cheesy action film. They're pretty good as entertainment products. But like, to name, the thing is, in that film, in the first one, it's about Americans trying to invade China and the PLA stops it. That's the plot. And in the second one, they go to Africa and help liberate a hospital or something. It's really cheesy, but it's quite funny.
Well, I mean,
it's almost like China named American diplomacy, like, I don't know, after a Steven Seagal film.
It's just, it's very funny though, isn't it, that like, American propaganda films, and I don't mean like actual propaganda, but like in their Hollywood war films, they're always seen as the good guys, aren't they? They're going in to like liberate some place from an evil despot, or like go and rescue one of their soldiers or something like this. Always a noble goal. But like the Chinese one that you've just described, like them literally repelling imperialist attacks, even though it's still like a bullshit kind of.
Well, to be fair, the film is kind of nice to Americans because it's not America the state that's invading. It's like a baddie who's like a private militia American. It's not even American. Isn't that what America is though? Private militias.
Well,
yeah, it's touched at, but because thing is, right, about China, they will always offer the face, right? When in films, they're not like the USA that will make racist films where brown people are the bad guys or Americans are the bad guys, and it's America. They'll sort of get round it a bit. They don't directly say America because they want to save America that little bit of face. Because maybe
I remember
that's just China. Anyway, we are digressing.
I can't remember which film it was. Let me just get this final point in. But there was this ridiculous film I watched once, and we were only watching them because they're absolution film, just pure shit. But it's quite funny to watch how Americans overinflate themselves and all that. And this particular film, I can't remember what it was. It was like, what's that guy? It's all about protecting the president. There's like a series of them. It's called like Olympus Has Fallen and stuff like this, I think.
You want me to name that one American film about protecting the president? Isn't that the storyline of every American film?
I'm sure the chat will know what I'm talking about. It's like this. It's like from the perspective of an American president's bodyguard, and like it's the same bodyguard protecting three different presidents. So no. I can't believe how many there are. But anyway, the point of this was that initially they tried to make the enemy character like the Chinese, but they realized that they needed the chance to get it shown in like Chinese cinemas. So that at the last minute they changed it to like a North Korean attack on mainland.
Oh,
mainland
that's
USA.
Red Dawn. That's the
No, it's not Red Dawn. It's something even more ridiculous. Hang on, as the chat kind of told me.
She's here now.
Talking about, I'm sorry. What happened was that I thought it was at 5:30, and then I stepped out to like get some coffee, and then I realized it was at 4:30. So now I am with my coffee.
Nice. It's good to have you. We're just talking about. Tom posted it in the chat. We're looking at your article, that NATO government by organised mob.
Oh, so, that's a great one. And I have some to add to it. I don't see the. I see it now. Okay,
cool.
Discord.
Get it up, and we'll carry on. What were we saying, Tom?
The film is it's called Olympus Has Fallen, right? And essentially the premise is that like at the very beginning, like there's like a big peace summit about Korea, with the American delegation meeting like a North Korean delegation in the White House, which in of itself is a ridiculous premise because we know they would never do that. But then like these North Korean like military hijackers like hijack an American fighter jet and like fly it into the into the White House, and like and then there's like a full-blown land invasion.
The White House? They can just
because North Korea bad, of course. Anyway, so bad North Korea is it then conducts like a full-blown land invasion of the American, like of Washington DC or something, like, which is geographically impossible and like would never ever happen in a million years.
But like the whole thing,
the whole thing is just absolutely ridiculous, and that's what I'm talking about. Like they never even make it realistic anymore. Like at least with the ones where the Russians are winning or the Chinese are invading or something, you can kind of think to yourself, all right, well that's like militarily
what are you talking
plausible.
About? These films have always been ridiculous. Like I said, I thought you were talking about the remake of Red Dawn, but the original of Red Dawn is like a group of American high school kids taking on the whole USSR.
I know.
They've always been ridiculous.
Did not do that. I would have believed it if it was a group of USSR high school kids taking on the whole Nazi army, but yeah, this is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Just turn the mic up a little bit, Esha.
For that matter.
I'm sorry, am I sound wrong or sound right?
You sound right, you just need to be turned up a little bit. I've got you on.
Okay. Oh, okay. You want me to turn up my volume?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
But anyway, we've only started on this, so we can. You've come in at a good point, Ash.
Hold on. Okay, before we move on, Tom, what was the other film that you told me that is horrible US geopolitical trash? What was it?
All of them, aren't they?
Well, not all of them.
Oh,
World War Z, right?
One.
World War Z.
Oh, yeah, World War Z,
I thought that was a zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, but it's not really. It's anti-communism hidden behind zombie apocalypse.
Okay, is this better now? Hold on, listen to me.
Yeah, you're good, yeah.
I just needed to turn it up a dial, that's all.
Go on, Tom.
The film actually is nowhere near as bad because basically it's just like a Hollywood blockbuster that was changed so much from the original source material, literally so that it could be shown in China, because the original book was actually banned in China, because the whole premise of the World War Z book is like, yes, it's a zombie book, but it's more like a geopolitical, like, wank fest for Americans. Like, the zombie virus obviously starts in China, of course, and spreads throughout the world because the evil authoritarian communist state doesn't want to tell anyone, which we've had proven false to us by COVID. But anyway, that's not the point. Like the ending of I'm gonna spoil it because if you haven't read it, you shouldn't read it anyway.
Who cares? None of us have read it and don't plan on reading it. We have better things to read.
Israel is like the only state that survives because of its apartheid wall, and like they literally talk about how good the apartheid wall is in keeping the zombies out. And I suppose that's a metaphor for Palestinians. I don't really know.
Hold on. Isn't there like a scene in the film in Israel where like everything's caged off and there's one side of the cage and then like the American is on the other side in this safe just carry on.
But the worst bit about it is like the Chinese state like collapses because there's so much communist infighting, and like some guy who's like one of the main characters of the book is like a Chinese nuclear submarine pilot, and he ends up like firing nuclear strikes at the Chinese mainland to destroy the last vestiges of the communist government. And then and in the very end, like when all the good bits of when the war's been won against the zombies and all that, like Cuba is like the world's financial heartland because it's gone democratic and good.
Oh
like,
god, that is the
Tibet-
stupidest thing I've ever
Tibet
heard, and I
is
want to
like-
slap. I've had. Oh my god.
It gets worse, Ash. Tibet is like an independent democratic state that is like flourishing with democracy, and like everyone loves independent Tibet. Like it's literally just an American geopolitical wankfest. Like it's got nothing. Like they play it up as like, oh, you know, China banned it because they talk about how the zombie virus would start in China and it all, you know, all that. But it's really because like they talk about how China will be destroyed with nuclear war and then like balkanized into like multiple democratic states, which is just like what every
That's it.
American commentator loves to, as I
Wank
say,
about
wank
Re-
over.
Reddit, the novel.
Yeah, it literally is.
exactly.
And the worst bit about it is it's
Yeah?
actually used as a manual in the US military now.
What?
Like, it's like required reading for like, I think it's
You're
the US
joking.
Marines or something. No, look it up.
Okay, I
Isn't
hope.
the author
okay.
like? I'm sure the author's like former
I think he's CIA or something.
something like that. Either that
Yeah,
or US military. Anyway, let's carry on.
That
with this
in
article.
itself should make it bannable. Like if the author is from the CIA, I think everything that person has, it should be banned. Kind of like you wouldn't have like, you know what I mean?
Kind of like nobody hangs up Hitler's artwork.
Exactly.
Best bit, like when they're trying to work out how to defeat the zombies, like they
Yeah.
this is so on the nose as well. Like they basically employ this guy who was like in the book, he was like one of the leading figures of the apartheid South African government. And like honestly, and the guy's like, yeah, my opinions were really unpopular because I basically suggested that the only way to defeat the zombies is with apartheid, and they like send all these like lower class individuals into the zombie areas to act as like bait. Like they're talking about like zombie apartheid and like playing it up as a good thing. It's like literally,
Jesus
it's one of the
Christ.
worst things I've ever read in my life. It's literally
Jesus, mother
horrible.
of God. Oh my God, that shouldn't just be banned. Oh my God, it's disgusting.
Horrible.
And then the film was just like a blatant.
They probably had to
fucking,
clean
just,
up the apartheid
generic
stuff.
zombie film. No,
Yeah.
the film was just like a generic zombie film. Like there was nothing like of the original plot in there at all because they wanted to sell the film in China.
And in other countries too. So I bet you they would not be like, oh yeah, cool, apartheid. Yeah.
Exactly.
Like literally, it's not even have to do with China. It's like any other country would be offended by this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right, anyway, let's carry on.
Oh,
with
and
this
India
article.
and Pakistan are destroyed in nuclear war as well, of course.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
are.
What was
good.
destroyed?
India and Pakistan.
India
They
and
just
Pakistan.
can't help but nuke each other in a Western.
Yeah. It's like so offensive. So yeah, it's like so that at the end of the zombie apocalypse, only white people live or something. Is that their thing?
That's exactly or white people, people who live in freedom and democracies that are underneath white people. But that's always been this.
I'm
It's always
pretty
been one of the
course.
Western tropes about India, isn't it? That India
Yeah.
and Pakistan need like a white
whitey.
man like Joe Biden to stand between them, or they're gonna nuke each other into
Nah.
oblivion.
Like I said, we can handle things. Just go away.
Exactly. Right. Let's carry on this article. Around 1958, it was safe to say that things.
Hold on. Let me just make a quick thing.
Go
This
on.
is kind of good because I'm also reading Nyango Sala's book about the sea. But this is really important because this is, if a lot of people will wonder, why are there 14 African countries that have the French currency? And so if we read about the one that doesn't, you'll understand why. So go for it.
Right. Okay. Around 1958, it was safe to say that things were not going well in France. In fact, the
Around
new-
1949.
So-
Start with NATO, 1949.
1949
On-
was it?
On April 4th, 1949 is where the article begins.
Oh,
Oh yeah, we've already read that
bit.
bit. We read that bit.
Okay.
We're at the
Go ahead.
next
You
one.
came late to class.
Yeah. Around 1958, it was safe to say that things were not going well in France. In fact, the New York Times warned that France was at the verge of civil war. France had to deal with the rise of its leftist labour movement. Meanwhile, the French currency was being devalued at an exponential pace. Almost every sector in France was revolting. Suffice to say, the wealthy business interests and the government were anxious about their heads.
It's interesting, isn't it, that like almost every sector in France today is still revolting, but it's just because the French.
Yeah. This has not
Sorry,
stopped
that was
since.
just anti-French racism. I was just.
Well,
I was calling them revolting.
you raised a point that's actually true though, because this battle still has not been
No, yeah,
consolidated
you're right.
inside France, right? They're still having to strike and fight back against French capital. Anyway, on top of this, French colonies all over the world were demanding freedom and equality. They were fighting to stop the centuries of plunder, pillaging, theft and exploitation. In response to the French government's weak response to these colonies, an extremely right-wing faction of the French army overthrew the French governor in Algeria and threatened to invade France. The Prime Minister of France resigned and Charles de Gaulle was installed. The aristocracy recognised that the crumbs they were throwing at the masses were insufficient. This posed a conundrum. How do they share a bit of cake to placate the masses while still hoarding the whole bakery for themselves? Sharing a little bit of cake could not be done at the expenses of the uber wealthy, and the uber wealthy demanded that France continued siphoning off wealth from Africa. Charles de Gaulle proposed a new constitutional reform through a referendum to stave off both the writing masses at home and placate the increasingly strong independence movement from their colonies. His idea, the colonies could have more autonomy while still being part of a French Union. Terms and conditions of the French Union were to be decided after the referendum. Neil in the chat says France should have been smashed up like England was after World War II. Of course.
Oh no, France should have been balkanized and completely like smashed. Like they should have taken a big cut it like a birthday cake.
Well, arguably, if the US and the UK had not raced to Berlin and had the Soviets consolidated Europe, then France would have been socialist, right? All of Europe would have been. They wouldn't have stopped at Germany, would they? They've continued all the way. Anyway, around this time, a small country in the North Atlantic area, Guinea, with a population of a little under 3.5 million people, wanted to free itself from the manacles of colonial rule. It dreamed of liberty, equality, and fraternity. I was having to Tom, you felt my pain in me saying that, didn't you?
It's just an inherent anti-French sentiment that runs deep in our blood, isn't it? And trying to utter the words correctly, just
Égalité,
something in us.
Égalité, fraternité, equal. We did what's the third one?
Equality?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, égalité, liberté, égalité, fraternité. Okay.
In Guinea,
Cringe language.
In Guinea, Charles de Gaulle began what he called campaigning, but the more appropriate word would be intimidating. In the capital, in the Great Hall that was filled with Guineans, he spoke first and included a not very veiled threat. We spoke of independence. I say here even more than somewhere that autonomy is at the disposal of Guinea. She can take it, and she can take it on September the 28th by saying no to the proposal that is made to her, and in this case I guarantee that the metropolis will not obstruct it. It will of course have consequences, but obstacles will not make it, and your territory will be able, as it wishes, and in the conditions it wants, to follow the route it wants, right?
Yeah, that was a complete threat. Oh, okay. So now then Sekou Tor, I don't have the subtitles, but just play this, it's just beautiful. He comes up and says, there is no dignity without freedom. We prefer the freedom of poverty than the opulence in slavery.
Nice.
And then the crowd erupted into cheers.
And that's in front of the French, right?
Yeah, the French president. Okay. So then
That's basically what the Haitians decided as well, wasn't it? When they had their slave revolt, that rather than being beholden to kind of Western capital and under the boot of empire, that they'd rather be free, even if it meant a more technically impoverished state, I suppose. Yes.
Well, so then the crowd erupted in cheers. A few days later, Guineans bravely went to the voting booth, and 95% of them voted to be free. And now this is the part. It's liberté, égalité, fraternité, blanc seulement. I hope people understood that joke.
I don't understand it, but that's
Blanc
because...
means white.
Right, okay. And what does...
Seulement means only, like for whites only.
Right, of course. Like
That's what the French really mean. Okay. As soon as the results came out, Charles de Gaulle ordered vengeance. From that time, claims that Paris wanted to set an example to other nations that dare to seek independence. According to Washington Post, in reaction and as a warning to other French-speaking territories, the French pulled out of Guinea over a 2-month period, taking out everything they could. They unscrewed the light bulbs, they removed sewage plants, in Conakry, pipelines in Conakry, they burnt medicines rather than leave them for the Guineans. On top of it, they pulled off, like they were acting like heroin, like, who's the ones, like, I forgot, there's one drug, meth addicts, like they went in and grabbed all the copper wires. It's like really psycho. Okay. They blew up the schools, destroyed the crops and the countryside. They blew up the roads and railways. The French were determined to reduce Guinea to rubble, all because the tiny nations dared to say no. Of course.
This is called salting the earth, I believe, where, like, the Romans would literally destroy a city and then till the farmlands with salt so that nothing could be grown, and it was a kind of way to completely destroy a city in every kind of meaningful way. Sounds like exactly like a modern day version of that, really.
Oh yeah, like I said, they literally were like meth addicts and pulled out like copper wires there. There was nothing, and in fact, because of this, like Guinea for the first time had some strange either tuberculosis or cholera, I can't remember, one of those diseases. They had like a huge outbreak of it. Okay. Of course, people in Guinea had to watch in horror as the French destroyed everything in the country. For if even one French soldier was mildly wounded, Charles de Gaulle could invoke Article 5 and the full wrath of NATO would turn the country into an inferno. And there was no way this tiny nation, which could have fit in the Bronx, been able to handle America's bloated army. France was not yet done with Guinea. Soon after destroying everything in Guinea, they intimidated the other countries to prevent them from giving official recognition to Guinea and providing any aid. A few days later, other African colonies would go to the ballot booth. But of course, they voted yes because the price of freedom was far too high.
Yeah, that's absolutely disgusting. The only thing to really say there is that it's a shame that Hitler didn't rip the fucking Eiffel Tower down when he annexed France, because, like, they don't deserve to have anything nice. Horrible bastards.
Oh yeah, I mean, to me, this is it's one of those things that it proves. Okay, what you realize is what Hitler wanted was all the colonies of France with France, and you'll also realize that most of the rich people in France 100% collaborated. In the Vichy government, they were all like, cool, dude, I don't care. You're gonna keep the unions down. So what people don't realize is that France, I mean, the only reason why Germany is... okay, whatever France did in the colonies is probably just as bad. But because there is no Red Army to collect all the evidence, none of us know... Like, they were able to destroy all the crimes, if that makes sense. Like, the Red Army, that's why we know a lot about the German, whatever happened in the East, but we don't know much about whatever happened elsewhere because there's nothing like the Red Army.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's that idea, isn't it, that history is written by the victor? So...
Well, yes, and I once had a Wikipedia editor say that, because what they did was they were... they were talking about the Marshall Plan, and for that they had a direct quote from Marshall, and I thought that they should, and then they had a summary of what Molotov said by like somebody who was probably a Nazi. So I removed that summary and put a direct quote of Molotov, which I think is more fair and reasonable. How can you argue with that? Like, if you're going to have a direct quote from Marshall, you better...
A primary source beats a secondary source, right?
Yeah. But they claimed that they made up some excuse and put it back. And I said, oh my God, this shows a pro-Western bias. And the Wikipedia editors was like, something about history being written by the winners. So they are open about having a pro-Western bias.
Well, why
And
wouldn't they be
even
open about it?
What?
Why wouldn't they be open about it?
Because they're supposed to be neutral, aren't they?
Why
It's
would you
only,
be? Yeah, but why would you be neutral when like this? I mean, you missed the first section of the show, but it kind of fits into that. Why would you act neutral when you know that there is nobody who can stop you? Right? Since when has the US ever acted neutral? It's only just starting to act more neutral now that.
No one ever acts neutral. I'm just saying Wikipedia, it claims to be all the knowledge, and they have this obsession about neutrality. But
Yeah,
it was
they're neutral with a Western spin, so it's neutral, and then in brackets Western neutral, right?
Correct.
That's what I'm
So
trying
when
to get at.
I guess I didn't. I mean, they could have deleted it later or made up some other excuse, but the fact that they responded to me, like people working there said, history it was created by winners when I accused them of having a pro-Western bias. That was a little jarring.
I mean, well,
It's the mask coming off, isn't it? Kind of thing. I mean, like recently we saw all them Chinese Wikipedia contributors get banned from contributing to the site, and these were like power users, so like the people who go and will edit like 100 articles a day or something, like really, really knowledgeable people, generally speaking. And these Chinese people were like mostly working on Chinese language articles and on articles to do with China and Chinese history. And like they were writing like, Xinjiang has been a part of China since 221 BC and stuff like that, which is a fact. And then like the editors would just come along and be like, you're just CCP shills, and they got banned for being
that's what I'm
CCP
talking about.
shills.
That's
Yeah.
neutral, and then in brackets Western, isn't it? Because it's that idea that you can just dismiss media because it's not quote unquote state owned. What? Just because Rupert Murdoch owns it, who then owns the state instead, just because it's it.
But well, okay, but they think that BBC is a reliable source. But there's another thing that I was just checking yesterday. Some idiot said that there was a Vinica massacre, and the only Vinica massacre I had heard about was from 1941, done by the Nazis. But allegedly there was another Vinica massacre. So I went to their Wikipedia site. The first thing is it had the wrong photo. It had the photo from the one where the Nazis killed everyone. You can tell because of Nazi uniforms. I was like, okay. And then I looked at the article. Everything was like citation needed, except for one, which directly went to the Wehrmacht War Crimes Bureau, as in Nazis. And the Nazis claimed that they quote unquote excavated something where they found some bodies from 1938, but all I saw in the pictures were clothes and not bodies. And apparently nobody else also thought that there was a massacre at this in 1937 in this location, because everyone kind of rolled their eyes. But in fact, there is no source other than the Wehrmacht War Crimes Bureau. So but still, it somehow seems to be enough to have a Wikipedia. I mean, I don't think Wikipedia activism is useful or anything, so I just give up. But I just once in a while go there to just check. And and it's like, oh, okay. And then there was another list of all these quote-unquote Soviet massacre sites, which I can go through, but I bet you 0% of them will be massacres.
Wasn't there like a similar thing with Katyn?
Hold on. Matt tweeted something funny earlier on this subject. Grover Fair's Katyn massacre book is hilarious because it starts with a quote that says, "What if we didn't just believe stuff Nazis said for no reason?" And then there's like 220 more pages. Like that line alone is enough, isn't it? Like, I don't care. Like exactly. A Nazi saying it to you, okay, opinion disregarded. No, nothing more. Because
the Katyn massacre is kind of taught as absolute fact in kind of.
Hold on one second. No, sorry. Tom, finish explaining the Katyn massacre, and I'll explain the Hatyn massacre. That is actually fact.
Okay,
apologies for my bastardized Polish pronunciation.
No. There are two different massacres. The Katyn massacre you've heard about in the West, and the Hatyn massacre that you have not heard about. So talk about the Katyn massacre first.
So like I can only talk about it from the kind of perspective of British education, which, and I mean British education spends. I'm introducing. And British education places a huge kind of emphasis on World War II because Britain can be painted as the good guys in British education. I'm not saying they were the good guys; they weren't objectively, but because obviously they were in the Allies alongside the actual good guys, the USSR. Britain likes to paint itself as the kind of victor, but they also like to do this both sides-ism, where they'll mention quote-unquote Soviet massacres, and Katyn is kind of taught as like one of the largest Soviet massacres of the war. One of the major reasons why the Soviet Union was like maybe not as bad as the Nazis, but you can't support the Soviet Union because they also did massacres. This kind of logic that the British education goes into. It's really bad.
Hold on 1 second. Okay, I'm going to just add 2 clarifications. It was exclusively of Polish officers. And just so you know who the Polish officers were, Poland was created in 1920. It was like a Balkanized country that was fakely created. And these were all members of the White Army. And Poland at that time had the biggest bloodbath there. So they had over 300 pogroms for Jews, which the army did. They also genocided Lithuanians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, some Turks even. So the thing, since Poland was a fake country, they tried to make it have only like Catholics. And so these were officers in a genocidal army. So if it's the Nazis, okay, good job. If it's the USSR, awesome, you killed a whole bunch of fascist officers. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, well, I mean, all of that is kind of left out of the British retelling of events. And I mean, it's kind of just taught to you to kind of, it's to play up the whole Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact kind of thing, where they say, like the Soviet Union was allied with Nazi Germany until Nazi Germany backstabbed them. That's literally the kind of.
Hold on, let me get to the other massacre that's even horrific that you'll never hear about though. This is the Katyn massacre. So this happened in Belarus. And what happened was that the partisans, so the partisans basically ended up killing a few Wehrmacht officers for genocide. And whenever they talk about it in the West, they're like, is Lukashenko like weaponizing it? And it's like, hey, fuck off. There's nothing to weaponize. You guys are horrible. And then this happened in 1943. And so what happened is that they burnt everything in the village. And then, so there's this one witness. He said, I wanted to get up, and he was 7. He called my mama, but she was already dead. And then they, among his burned corpses, there was everything. And then the massacre at Katyn left 143 villagers villagers, and only 6 people survived, 5 children and 1 adult.
Horrible.
Yeah.
So, and it was like in retaliation for an estimated, in the occupation, is an estimated 2.2 million Belarusians died, 1 in 4. So this was not Nazis, or not any this was like literally like going to villages, daycares, and children and everyone. But the reason why they sometimes they do, like whenever Lukashenko or anyone mentions these massacres, they're like, why is he weaponizing it? And it's like, no, he's not. He's telling the truth. You are. I mean, the Katyn massacre, it doesn't really like.
What a strange. Hold on though. What a weird thing to do though, because a country that you deem an enemy is not allowed to remember bad moments in its history, but the USA is able to project 9/11 onto the world every year.
Okay, how many 9/11s is this when you kill 2.2 million people?
This is what I'm saying. How many 9/11 times however many, right? 10,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
A billion 9/11s on the same day in every American city. But that's besides the point. I mean, like,
No, I'm just saying for Belarus, this is a lot of 9/11. And anyways, I'm saying this because what you see is how unneutral even like information is. So yes, okay. As for the Katyn massacre, no one has been able to find the documents that blames either the Soviets or the Nazis. Like they have found the mass bodies. Like there's like about 30,000 only men, only officers, but no one's sure who it is. As in, like it's either like neither from the Nazi side or nor the Soviet side have there been any discovery of documents, and it's not like people care per se to go further. So, yeah.
It's just taught as inalienable
hold on.
fact.
Why would the US care? It doesn't care about the identities of kids it droned in Afghanistan last week. That it just goes, oh, it was a bit of a mistake, wasn't it? And then
Yeah, but this was not. I don't think this was a mistake. I think
no. But what I'm saying is, why care about an event from nearly 100 years ago, right? When they don't even care about people they droned themselves last week. What's with this big? This is what we're talking about with the bias in information. Is they're gonna keep
this particular event. Hold on.
Go on.
I don't think that it's about. This one is actually the U.S. really judging it up. It's Poland, which is a puppet state, and it cares because it needs to demonize the Russians and stuff because Poland's a.
Well, it's doing what Nazi Germany did, which is use the same story they invented to demonize the Soviets because they had to demonize Russians to Germans to justify their mass invasion of Russia, right?
Yeah, so. And Poland is also a fake country. I'm sorry, it's hard for me to like. It was in Tsarist Russia. Later, France, England, and America paid this guy, and it balkanized it. So for them, they don't really have a history separate from Tsarist Russia, and they don't want to admit that. Like they don't want to admit. Like Ukraine admits it, but they don't want to admit that, oh yeah, we were part of Tsarist Russia and then we became independent, which can be fine. They always wanted to seem like they're always forever a country, which is ridiculous. And so for that, they have to make up all these like, oh, we were a real country kind of myth. And the thing about it with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, what offends them is not the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, but the fact that it's basically the fact that Poland was like a little bit of like a stronghold of capitalism in that area, and basically when you see how people greeted the Red Army over there in Poland, they were just cheering, happy, etc. It's like it just kind of they were kind of upset that it was not their base of capitalism anymore, and entirely has to do.
Not even that, right? Poland is a socialist country after World War II. Wasn't a Soviet republic, was it? It was independent.
Yeah, it was a socialist country, but it was not. Basically, it used to be it was not that different from Romania or other fascist countries that the West put up in those years. It's just that they had to whitewash.
What I'm getting at is the Soviets didn't have to force socialism on them. They just willingly.
No one forced socialism.
But this is what I'm saying. No. The fact that the Warsaw Pact countries existed proves that the Soviet Union wasn't going around forcing socialism on other nations. Other nations around the Soviet Union was like, that country next door to us is socialist, and their people are, oh well, let's be like them, okay? It just sort of spreads as Marx predicted, right?
Well, yes, but I'm saying now look at it from the point of view from an American investor who invested lots of money in Poland in the 1920s. Now you've just lost all your investment, and so that offends you a lot. So you're going to be like obsessing over it because that's the moment where you lost a lot of your investments that you'll probably never regain. And that's where the obsession of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact comes from, is the American investor who's kind of like upset.
Yeah, and I mean it's literally just a case of Stalin being pragmatic, saying at this stage of the game, if the Nazis invade us, and right now we do not have the resources to repel the attack without them arriving at Moscow before we have the capacity to repel it. So it makes more sense to say, right, we'll agree that when you get to a certain point in Poland, you will stop attacking, and the remainder of Poland, which is the areas that Poland seized from Latvia, Lithuania, and which other country was it? It's like 3 countries that like had their land stolen by Poland, which were Soviet states. Essentially, basically, Russia said we will return this land to the Soviet republics, or the socialist states, even that Poland took them from initially, and Nazi Germany can kind of have the rest, and we just won't kind of, involve ourselves with that, because we don't have the manpower or the capacity to physically push the Nazi army back yet. However, when 1941 rolls around, or 1942, when the
45.
I meant when the initial invasion happened.
Barbarossa?
Barbarossa, yeah.
Oh yeah, that was early
1941.
1941.
Yeah, 41. Like at that stage of the game, Stalin's had already built up a lot of the industry and moved a lot of the factories beyond the Caucasus Mountains, so that when the Nazis did invade, the tank building factories, the artillery building factories, all this kind of stuff was safe from the initial attack, which wouldn't have been the case had Molotov-Ribbentrop not been signed, because they would have basically invaded the USSR at a point that would have been much more inconvenient for the USSR than when they actually did.
Well, another thing is that the Nazis handed over a lot of weapons under the idea that the Slavs are genetically inferior, and they wouldn't have been able to operate the Nazi weapons, which was false. And they re-engineered it, and so they had before then the Soviets didn't really have an air force, but by the end of the war,
master race.
Yeah, they had an air force and all sorts of things. So it turned out to be...
Nazi race science is so funny, isn't it? Like when you not like it's not funny, but when you look back at their ludicrous ideas, you think to yourself, how did people this stupid seize power?
Easy. Imagine if you it's all about okay, so when you are in power and when you're a tyrant and you hang out with only people below you, like servants you can fire, you never get the actual truth from them. They're actually telling you always what you want to hear. So if that happens for a few thousand generations, or however long these hereditary aristocracies ended up being, well, that's a long time. And so that's where they because they had no one to actually break them down with their dumb ideas, it just festers throughout all the levels of government.
But
it's also just so funny though, isn't it? On
the topic of non-aggression pacts, I can't find the image while we're on the show, but there's an image, isn't there? Didn't half of Europe have pacts with Germany as well?
You know who was the number 1 munitions dealer to Germany?
Go ahead.
You know who was the number 1 munitions dealer to Germany in the year 1930 to 39?
Go ahead.
Britain.
Either Britain or the USA, wasn't it? Britain. It's one of the two. It's always going to be one of the two.
It's definitely Britain.
No, I believe you. I was just saying, before you said it, it was either going to be the USA or Britain. They're the only 2 countries. But it just goes to show, doesn't it, that making a non-aggression pact literally as a way to build up your own resources to a state that you kind of have the capacity to repel them when the aggression inevitably arrives, is seen as kind of allying with the Germans, but literally owning IG Farben factories and funding IG Farben factories which are producing the Zyklon B genocide gas that the Nazis are using to mass kill Jews and Soviets and other non-desirable categories, is seen at this stage of the no one even talks about this. It's literally never the first time I'd ever heard about this collaboration between the USA and Nazi Germany was when you brought it up, Esh, on the show a couple of months back. I'd literally never heard about this.
Okay.
But but everybody in the West knows about the so-called alliance between Stalin and Hitler, which obviously wasn't an alliance. But that's what I'm getting at.
I need to like make a list of like frequently thought of dumb myths by Westerners. So I'm gonna add up this one. Yeah, I should just do all that. Yeah, that's a great idea. Maybe I should like read one frequently dumb myth that Westerners believe.
What you need to do, right? What you need to do is go on like high school education history books and pull up all the lies about the Soviet Union, because not many people study history further than school, and that's how it's designed. That's how education in the West is designed, right?
In the US, they don't mention that much of like they don't even mention like they don't even bother to mention the bad things or the good things or anything. They're just like, oh, Cold War between US and Soviet Union, and that's it, and they keep it vague. That's all they.
I think the reason for that is in Britain you have to teach these anti-Soviet lies because Britain was so close to the USSR geographically, with it being, geographically within the continent of Europe, both countries. That there was always a severe threat to the British ruling classes of Stalinism, Bolshevism,
or
Marxism, Leninism.
The Tsar was related to the
close
Queen.
to Britain over when you apply the word
And the Tsar
well.
was related to the Queen of England. That extra adds it. But in the U.S., I think they noticed that the more people tell about the Soviet Union, the more they start liking. So they just try to keep it as vague and dark black hole as possible.
With the USA, I think like even though there was always a fear of communism coming over, there was always that massive geographic gap. And before things like the internet, people just couldn't find out about this kind of stuff. So as soon as it started to become actually mainstream, that's when the USA shit themselves and said, right, fuck, we need to do McCarthyism right now. We need to start arresting anyone that's kind of got any pro-Soviet leanings. So like whilst the British state had already baked in anti-communism into its kind of educational ideologies to children from an early age, pretty much as soon as the Second World War ended, or even before that probably, the USA didn't need to focus on this as much, because they just kind of parroted themselves as, oh, we just turned up, saved Europe from Nazism, we are the good guys, standard USA bullshit that they pull, even though their contributions were negligible at best.
You shouldn't
even track points for all the Nazis that they helped afterwards.
You shouldn't even be having to. You shouldn't even be having to bring up things like this on the screen now, which I'll get into in a second. But you should. The Western media's got people believing that like North Koreans have only got 28 haircuts to choose from. When you see that, when people are like, oh, they've only got 28 haircuts to choose from because I'm gonna say this is what we tweeted out when we posted about that. Like, name 28 haircuts for men. Name 28 Western haircuts for men. Go. Nobody's named 28 yet. I need 29 US haircuts for men. So just to prove that the West is the bastion of freedom and has at least one more haircut than authoritarian North Korea. This is why I'm saying you have to, people don't study more than a high school level. If they're willing to believe this crap about North Korea and look no further, I mean, they're no fault of their own. Proletarian, you don't know what you don't know, and capitalism has people working to their maximum mental capacity, right, that it can. So often people don't have the time.
Out a little early. I'm really sleepy, so I hope you don't mind. I'm gonna head out early this week. I hope that's okay with you guys.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, talk to you later.
Go Ash.
Bye.
See you later, Ash. Just to add on something you've got on screen there with the Four Powers Pact, there's something else that like is kind of seen completely differently in the Western lens than it is when they talk about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and that's the whole idea of appeasement, where literally Britain and France sat down together and said, Hitler, you can annex all of these countries and these bits of land, just go wild, just do it. And they literally carved Europe up, allowing Hitler to annex various pieces of land. Like, they allowed this to happen.
But this in Britain as well. this in Britain is seen as like as just like an event that happened. Oh, silly Neville Chamberlain or whatever.
Yeah, that's the thing. No, that's the thing. It's seen as a silly thing. It's seen as, Neville Chamberlain was
What
so
a mistake.
stupid. Yeah, but then the exact same thing, or even kind of nowhere near as bad, which was the delineation of Poland, the kind of the lines that basically Stalin drew and said, don't cross these lines, do what you want with Poland because it's a fake state that we don't really give a shit about, but don't cross these lines because that is considered USSR territory. That's seen as like the ultimate evil red-brown alliance, like the most evil thing that could ever have happened. Nazism and communism coming together as a bedfellows and all this shit. But literally the exact same thing, if not worse, that Neville Chamberlain did is just seen as like, what an oopsie. It's just so ridiculous. It's the worst double standard, and like people never talk about this as a double standard. To do the difference in narrative between the two.
Mm-hmm. It is, but I mean, look at this image. You see, people on Twitter you'll be arguing with someone, won't they? And they'll go, but what about, this is the thing with Westerners. You'll prove one thing wrong, and then they'll go, but what about this? And you've got to prove that. Well, what about this? It's devil's advocate the whole way down right to the bottom, and you'll always get this brought up at some point when you're just a tanky after that, right? What is it? Why is it that you can put this information in people's faces and they still will argue against it? What's that about? What's that trait that makes people do that? It's
probably just refusal to accept you're wrong. People don't like to accept that. It's a simple fact in life, isn't it? That people, especially when they've been taught something in school which they've believed their entire life, if you show them irrefutable proof, because so much shit is easily kind of falsifiable nowadays with Nazis doing it constantly, and I mean real neo-Nazis, it is fair to kind of be shown something that completely contravenes your worldview and go, that must be fake, as a knee-jerk reaction to it. But that is the knee-jerk reaction to everything for Americans, like literally everything. I mean, when something is proven wrong to me, an opinion that I hold, or something is verifiably proven incorrect with hard evidence, I'm like, all right, fair enough, I will adjust my worldview accordingly, which is why I'm a communist, because much of this shit was disproven to me. And at first I did kick back when I was a liberal. Like I think I'm pretty sure I must have done the same. I remember back when Trump was very first in power, like the early days of like 2016, I was just getting out of my liberalism stage, and like I'd be saying to people like, on Twitter, I remember calling people Russian bots when they were like saying that, the whole Russia Gate scandal thing was bullshit, which has verifiably been proven to be the case now. I would say to people, I remember saying to people like, what's the weather like in Kaliningrad? And thinking I was really clever, like typing this fucking liberal NPC line basically, and people would just be replying to me like, you're stupid. And that's a fair response to my response, because it was stupidity and it was refusal to accept that I was wrong about something, because liberalism kind of enshrines this kind of idea in you that you are always right, because the system is always right, because it's the global dominant system, because the USA triumphed over the evil USSR, this kind of viewpoint. I think it's just baked into so many Westerners' heads that like it's hard for them to break out of, and as such it causes pushback. That's the only explanation I can think of, really.
It's just strange, isn't it? It's a weird art. It's almost pointless, isn't it, with some people? Do you get what I mean? Like you find yourself in a pointless debate with some people because it's so hard to undo, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's the solution to that? I mean, those people exist all over the world, don't they? They exist in socialist countries as well. But we're not suggesting that everybody in Cuba is some well-read Leninist that understands Lenin's. It's just not how it is it? People in life don't have time to dedicate themselves to that. The point is that they're run by a government system that requires the study of that sort of stuff. But Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Society can operate. I guess it just proves that it proves that what am I trying to say? It's just the difference, isn't it, between dictatorship of the proletariat and dictatorship of the bourgeoisie is just this bias of information. Obviously, a dictatorship of the proletariat, the information is biased towards the proletariat's interests, right? Which is always, as we see in capitalism now, that is the interests of the capitalist class. Like they put out an article on Chinese clothing company, right? And the reason why they've done that is because it's like a hit piece. The Chinese company undercuts every Western clothes shop because now you can go and buy it straight from the factory for like £2 or something. Do you know what I mean? Because that's just I think capitalism, right? Capitalism's going to do that.
There's so much stuff like they'll say, "Oh, you're brainwashed because you follow Chinese propaganda or Soviet propaganda or whatever the line is." But the thing is, Westerners absolutely hate to be told that they are the brainwashed ones. And I mean, you and I are both Westerners, right? So we grew up under Western brainwashing. We acknowledged this. I mean, you did a lot earlier than me. But I mean, in your life, I mean, not just because you're an old fucker, but the once you realize that every system brainwashes you in some way, like the Chinese system will brainwash you to be in favor of the proletariat, in favor of your own class interests. One thing that struck me that I was brainwashed was when somebody explained to me the difference between a nation, a state, and a country. Like, for my entire life, and I consider myself a relatively intelligent person, I was under the impression that these three were synonyms for each other, pretty much. And it was only when you realise that state, because people say, what state what state is that? It's the state of Britain or whatever. Like, it's kind of synonymous with the country of Britain in the West. But in China, they explain the difference between the state as it is, the political system that wields a monopoly of power for the class that presides over said state. And it's within the interests of liberal capitalist governments in Britain and in America to obfuscate this fact, because if you think that state just means country, you're not going to question why the state has a monopoly of power and which class is in control of the state. But for a proletarian state, it makes sense to explain this differentiation, because you say the country is China, the state is the system we operate under, and it's controlled by the People's Republic of China, which is a socialist state, and this means that it's controlled by the working class. And it's these little tiny things that you don't even realize until somebody breaks the brainwashing on you, really. I mean, I think there's many people in the Gen Z kind of group, like the younger Zoomer communists that you see all over Twitter and stuff now, where these kids are I think because they're seeing the contradictions of capitalism in front of their very eyes and the contradictions of liberalism, and they're realizing that they've been brainwashed almost their entire lives, and they are managing to break out of it themselves without even generally having to be told that they're brainwashed, which is incredible, because I'm sure I had to be told that I was brainwashed, and it was only kind of when I lived in China the first couple of times that I was like, hang on, some things about my education have been fundamentally wrong. Why is this the case? And then it was only that made me go on to read communist literature, which opened my eyes to this kind of stuff. And it I don't know, I feel like it's almost like lying by omission in the West. Like, they will, they'll tell you the general truth. They won't go telling you outright lies 90% of the time. Like, yes, they will sprinkle some outright lies in when they're talking about communist countries, socialist countries, whatever you want to call them. But 90% of the time, they just don't tell you things. And then that omission, whilst telling you you're an intelligent person and giving you, high scores on tests and stuff, it then creates this kind of backlash when somebody says you are misinformed, you have been informed wrong, and it's coming from a tanky or whatever who's saying these things. It makes you think, well, you're just a lying commie. Like, I can't be wrong. I'm from Britain or America, you know, the greatest country on earth if you're American, or like I'm an intelligent British person, you know, I can't be wrong. You know, some Russian bot is telling me I'm wrong.
It's the bias, isn't it? It's the bias factor, and the fact that I think the thing about capitalism is there's no real difference between a capitalist and a proletarian, right? Whereas when feudalism was around, there was a visible difference, is what I'm talking about. When feudalism was around, there was a visible difference, wasn't there, between a serf and a lord, right? A visible difference in every single possible way, size of hat, all that kind of stuff. A proletarian can. There was no way under feudalism that a serf could become a lord. Not a chance in hell, right, of that happening. But under capitalism, they can both switch classes, right? They can do that. A proletarian person can make it big in various ways, right? And this is why a capitalist will always use that story to cover themselves. Oh, well, that came from a working class background. Yeah, we know. You know, that's one of the benefits of capitalism, right? That can happen. But the point is, it happens to such a tiny minority, and at the expense of a lot of other proletarians, right? That's the but capitalists will use that as a crutch to try and appear one of us, when in fact they are one of us. They're just one of us that's exploiting quite a lot of us. And the opposite can happen as well. A capitalist can lose everything and become proletarianized, right? And a member of the proletariat, right? They switch to it, but a serf can never become a lord. It's not a Disney movie where, like, you know, a maid ends up becoming a princess. That just never happened, did it, under feudalism? It's a fairy tale, right? But under capitalism, the two can switch. Now, I mean, somebody I was talking to the other week, and they were saying, like, class traitors are not the class that they're traiting on or something. And I was the answer, well, how are they a class traitor then? Do you know what I mean? Why would you even bring something that stupid up? But that's the difference, isn't it, between, we get a bias. So when you are learning history, we've said this before, they could be quite honest, but you have to understand who they're talking about, right? If you don't understand the class dynamic of that piece of writing, it may seem like it means every single human, but it doesn't, right? It's like the American Constitution, we the people, right? Yeah, they mean people who at the time they considered people. Now they don't teach you that, do they? Same with they don't teach you that the British considered Indians to be not people. Once you understand that, and you twig that the merchant class did that across the entire world, then it makes sense, doesn't it? And the bias is shattered. I think that's why quite a lot of people are caught up in that. Now, I mentioned it a minute ago. Let's look.
I think as well, what you've just described before we move on is like...
I'm not moving on, I'm carrying on that subject, but go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, back in like the age of like the boomers and the Gen Xers, the kind of idea of social mobility, like moving up the classes, literally changing your class from proletarian to petty bourgeois to big bourgeois, was quite possible and quite plausible. Like it was something that could be reasonably done by not a large number of the working class, but by a significantly larger number than you've got today, right? So
and I wouldn't even say that. What I would say is, I would say that the ability that a tiny minority could become merchants allowed this idea to spread, and mix that in with the post-war boom in production for the proletariat, right? AKA consumerism. Just because you've got a lot of things doesn't mean that you've made it or that you're a capitalist, right? Do you get what I mean?
No. But what I'm saying is, like,
what I mean is, but they can sell this. This is what the American dream is, isn't it? they can sell this idea of individualism and you're just under the wing of Elon Musk or whatever to Westerners, but really it's just consumerism. You just throw in like cheap plastic items at them and being like, here, look, you do have lots of value because you've got lots of things. Your home is filled with lots of things, therefore, you know, capitalism has provided lots for you. There's no food on the table, but you know, you've been down to B&M and bought lots of cheap stuff.
But I think as well, like with definitely like the older generations, the two generations before like the millennial generation, so 3 generations before like the Gen Z generation of today, there definitely was more of a capacity for social mobility for the majority of people. For example, like the vast majority of boomers own their own home, followed by the vast majority of Gen Xers tend to own their own home as well, to some extent, own some rental properties, might own their own business. You know, this was almost a majority of people when they got to their like middle age kind of age range, whereas now pretty much no one owns their own house. Everything's rented because everything's been bought up by monopolies, landlord monopolies, companies which you know, act on behalf of landlords. Everything is so monopolized to the fact that there is no kind of space in the market for new businesses because they just get instantly crushed by the super monopolies we've got today. We are very much so at an end stage of capitalism. Like, I know Lenin always said that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, but I think like massive monopolies are like the true end stage of capitalism. Whereas back in the day, you would see many I'd say back in the day, like some kind of boomer myself, but whereas back in the day you'd see many kind of small independent businesses, little shops on your high street, for example. Now they've all been crushed by 1 or 2 huge supermarkets, and then you've got like all of the online businesses which have crushed the rest of the you know, the big high street businesses. This monopolization of pretty much every aspect of our lives, be it from housing down to kind of
films. It's only Marvel films that get made. There's only people visit 4 websites that are all owned by the same company.
Exactly. Literally everything is monopolized to such a disgusting
all the lies
extent.
that they made out about the Soviet Union only having like one brand of stuff, and it's happening. It's literally happening.
Yeah, exactly. That's the case, and I think that's why you've got so many people of this new generation that have become radicalized by socialism without having a huge socialist power to look up to, like the USSR. I mean, yeah, you've got China, but China's kind of atypical in the way that it does these things. Obviously, it's getting smeared now more and more because it's becoming kind of this new USSR to many young people. People are looking to China as you know, the up and coming socialist power. People are genuinely angry at this.
I don't think that's why it's smeared, but you know, I'll allow it.
Basically, what I'm saying is like people are so aware of their material conditions now, and the fact that back in the day you would have had to go to the library, for example, and go and get
you're seeing articles on Twitter that are like
evolution, and
you're seeing articles on Twitter though that are like, oh, Generation Z is now in the workplace, what does it mean? All these like really liberal scared articles, because they are scared, right?
Yeah, and this is probably one of the most radical generations that is, I mean, they're much more radical than the millennials. Like, I mean, you're a millennial. I'm like one of the last millennials before the Gen Zs came out. I think Gen Zs are like the year
like
after
an
me.
Album
literally.
release.
Yeah, pretty much. But that's the kind of situation we got now. Like, whereas people in our generation were radicalized because we were kind of born at the end of the good times, as it were. We're now in a full-blown like epoch of crisis where everything's monopolized. The future's bleak as fuck. Climate change is now not just like some kind of hippie thing like from the 70s, but it's a very much so like an existential threat to all life on planet Earth. And we are living through kind of like an apocalyptic time, and the USA is going through its kind of death throes of its empire at the same time.
Right.
So I think like the conditions are ripe for like what's going on right now. I think it's kind of a natural conclusion to the economic situation of today, pretty much.
Let's have a look at this. Is GCSE for anybody not in the UK. GCSE is the exams that 16-year-olds take at school, so like high school. This is the last exam that you take mandatory as well, so after this you can just go out into the world. So this is the very basically the benchmark Western Cold War / Soviet history that you're going to get. Let's just have a quick look at this just to see what it's like. This is like what your mum believes, right? The US entered World War II against Germany and Japan in 1941, creating a grand alliance of the USA, Britain and the USSR. This uneasy alliance would ultimately break down into the Cold War. The alliance of the USA and the USSR brought together two sides that were divided by their political ideologies. Capitalism isn't a political ideology. I suppose bourgeoisie and proletarian
liberalism is the ideology, isn't it? Capitalism is the economic system.
The political and economic systems of the USA and Britain were based on capitalism, while since its foundation in 1917, the Russian Revolution, the USSR based its economy on communism.
Based communist ideology.
However, the actions of Nazi Germany and its ally Japan in World War II had driven these two political enemies together. Britain had been at war with Germany since Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939, despite the fact that Stalin had carved up and invaded Poland. There you go. Stalin had carved up and invaded Poland in 1939 alongside Hitler. The USSR...
Hang on a minute. If declare war on any state that invaded Poland, why didn't the UK also declare war on the USSR if Poland was also carved up by the Soviets? The reason for that is because it wasn't like the Soviets only went into the parts of the territory that were kind of ceded to the USSR and to its respective Soviet republics after the collapse of the Polish state, which meant that Poland was no longer, it didn't exist. The USSR didn't enter Poland, or the land that currently constitutes Poland, until Poland didn't actually exist anymore. So it's bullshit. What they're saying is bullshit, but do continue.
Yeah, but this is what you said earlier on, right? Where they will tell the truth. It's correct, but it's bias, isn't it? Because technically it's correct, right? But it's not telling you the truth. It's correct in the explaining events that did happen, but you're explaining it from the opinion of a capitalist, right? Which is not necessarily the truth. It's just an opinion. Anyway, in December 1941, Germany's ally Japan launched a surprise attack on the US naval base at Pearl Harbor. Blah blah blah. Here we go.
The only base in Imperial Japan ever did.
Revision tip. Understanding the differences between capitalism and communism. Capitalism...
More like revisionist tip.
Under capitalism, you get several political parties representing different sectors of society, whereas under communism, big bad one-party state, right? So dishonest already.
Hang on a minute. They're saying that capitalism is when multiple parties... They're not even saying democracy at this stage of the game. They're literally saying capitalism. So how do they reconcile that with, like, the idea of authoritarian capitalism, as some like radical liberals will call it, like, you know, all of the fucking dictatorships that the USA propped up after
they're not meant to exist. You don't need to think about them anymore.
But why don't they just say democracy? They could have said democracy versus communism, which is still bullshit, because obviously we all know why, because communism is a democracy. It's probably far more democratic than...
Well, look, this is the next one.
Communism now.
This is the next one. Capitalism. Governments are chosen by democratic elections, and under communism, no democratic elections and no opportunity to change the government by election. This is why you shouldn't get the BBC to educate your kids. Capitalism. People are free to set up private businesses and make money for themselves. But under communism, all businesses and factories are owned by the state, the big bad state.
So based.
Under capitalism, individual rights and freedoms are important, but under communism, individual rights and freedoms are less important, and obedience to the state, the big bad state again. It's that big bad state. Big tanky red fash state.
Thing is though, that is. That is correct. If you boil it down to individualism, individualism is seen as less important than collectivism, which is
But it's not even that,
correct
right?
because
It's
we're
not
a
even
collective
that.
species.
No, Tom. You just need to read those sentences as if you're a capitalist writing them, because they're not meant to be read by proletarians and think that they're about proletarians. Under capitalism, capitalists do have individual rights and freedoms to act like Shell Oil and just destroy the environment and planet. That's what they're talking about. But under communism, their individual rights and freedoms are less important than obedience to the state, in the way that China says jump and Elon Musk says how high when it comes to doing business in China, right? That's what this is what I'm trying to get at when I'm saying that. Obviously sometimes they will speak the truth. You don't look at this and think that they're talking wrong. No, they're not. They're talking about this is how they see it from their point of view. They don't give a shit if a proletarian believes this, because a proletarian's individual rights is never going to be suppressed by a communist state anyway, right? So they can just say it. Anyway, under capitalism, freedom of speech and freedom of press, again, they do have that, right? Jeff Bezos is free to buy and sell newspapers at his will. Under communism, censorship and state-controlled media. Capitalists are not allowed to operate media. These things are true. They're not just. They're
true, but they're just like it's the manner in which they're passed, isn't it? More than anything
you have
else.
to understand who's saying it and why. That's the dialectic, isn't it? The context.
It's hilarious. Like when you think of it in that kind of manner, though, isn't it? Because you're like, well, yes, you are correct, but why is this a bad thing? Like, this is not a bad thing. There is no freedom of the press. That's good.
This is brilliant. Look at this bit. Idea. This is meant to be an education website. Check this out for a top tip. While it's important to know the key differences between capitalism and communism, be careful not to spend too long writing about this in the exam. You can summarize how different the USA and USSR were in a sentence or two, and then move on to their relationship and events themselves. When I was reading that sentence, be careful not to spend too long writing about this, because if you do spend too long, you end up like Karl Marx with like 3 volumes of Capital.
Or just even better, it's like, do not spend too long thinking about.
Well, that's what it is, please. Isn't it? But just that other line. Don't spend too long thinking about it. You can sum it up in a sentence like we have done above, where you can just say communism. It's just China bad, right? You could just go into this exam and write USSR bad, USA good. You probably get an A. You probably get an A on that. Let's carry on looking through this.
Fuck's sake.
Just as given the war had been going since 1939, it's the big three. They met in Iran. What do they call it? Persia still, 1943. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, Franklin D. Roosevelt and Premier Joseph Stalin. They discuss the group's planned invasion of Nazi-occupied France. Stalin, the leader of the USSR, was keen to see this happen. At this point, the Soviet Red Army was the only army fighting Nazis on land, right? The USA and Britain would invade France by 1945. The USSR would join the USA and Britain in the war against Japan once Nazi Japan defeated. Again, this one has told the truth, right? Stalin was keen to see D-Day happen, but at the same time, they're telling on themselves there, aren't they? Because they're going, yeah, we just sat back and let you get fucked by the Nazis, like.
What I picked up on from that the most was the only ones fighting Nazi Germany on land, right? So the implicit statement they're making there is that like Britain was doing this massive naval war against Nazi Germany, and that that's what's implied when they're specifying on land. But Nazi Germany had like nothing of a navy really. Like it was infinitesimal in comparison. Like the Kriegsmarine in World War II was very small in comparison to their like land forces and the amount of energy that was spent in this kind of theatre of conflict. The Nazis literally acknowledged that they couldn't beat Britain in a naval war, so they just didn't even bother really fighting Britain in a naval war. Like this didn't happen, right? They could have just said they were the only ones fighting Nazi Germany. Okay. Right, I'm just going to continue where Fran's just taking a break there. So it's just me. You've got me for just a second. So where else are we? I'll have to get it up on my side of the screen. Sorry about this unprofessionalism, guys. I'm trying to operate off a Chinese VPN here as well, so my internet speed is not very fast. Right. Where are we here? I mean, they're not wrong when they call it history revision.
History revision,
but it's not
exactly.
about. But it's not about revising. Well, it is. They're revising history directly.
The Yalta Conference.
I'm curious. I'm curious.
In February 1945, the Big Three, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, met again at Yalta in the Crimean region of the USSR. Note what it says there. This is one of those cases. This is one of those cases where this was written. This was written and hasn't been edited
or updated for propaganda purposes.
Exactly, since certain geopolitical events have happened. But notice it says Crimean region of the USSR. Hint, hint. Anyway. That map, I can't tell what maybe they've put it in yellow as a little hint. Anyway, to agree on the post-war settlement and decide what to do with Germany once it's been defeated. With an Allied victory looking likely, the aim of the Yalta Conference was to decide what to do with Germany once it had been defeated. In many ways, the Yalta Conference set the scene for the rest of Cold War Europe. Germany would be divided into 4 zones. Blah, blah, blah. France would get to be France again because Britain demanded it, blah blah blah. German capital Berlin was about 100 miles inside the Soviet zone. It would be divided into 4 zones, blah blah blah. This is, so the Americans could start Operation Gladio.
Look at number 3 though. Look at point number 3. That's hilarious. The way they've worded that.
All countries freed from Nazi control were to be guaranteed the right to hold free, bangs table, democratic, teeth grinding elections to choose their own governments. Democratic, their own governments. This commitment was realised as an official joint statement, the Declaration on Liberated Europe. However, Stalin was offered a sphere of influence in Eastern Europe where communists.
It's like they just said, like I read that as they just say, okay, like, we're giving it to you personally, Stalin. Like, you do what you want with fucking Latvia. It's just a weird thing. Not like
they
the
do
USSR.
that with. There was that article, wasn't there, on Stalin's wealth that counted the entire state GDP of the USSR as Stalin's personal wealth, and their reasoning for it was just communism. Well, Stalin is the state because he's a dictator of the state, and communism means big state bad. So Stalin's personal wealth equals Soviet Union. Just it's so mindless, isn't it? But
largely pointless to read. But point 5 there is interesting.
All the leaders made a commitment to pursue and put on trial suspected Nazi war criminals. I like how that's worded, actually, because that is also quite telling, isn't it?
I mean, the USA definitely pursued Nazi war criminals, but
I know,
it wasn't
that's what I'm saying.
Bring them to justice.
yeah, this is what I'm saying. They made a commitment to pursue him. It's just we'll have a look for him. You know what I mean? It's like somebody comes round and they're like, have you seen my cat? It's like as if Stalin was like, yeah, we're looking for these Nazis, and the West was like, yeah, if we see him, we'll let you know. Do you know what I mean? But we're not really looking. Or he's already working for NASA in the USA. One of those two. Anyway, the Allied agrees to the setting up of a United Nations, an organisation dedicated to international cooperation and the prevention of war, which is interesting that the BBC say that it's been set up for the prevention of war, isn't it? Because one of the Allied nations and its comprador puppets have used the United Nations on multiple times to start wars in the last 20 years, haven't they? 30 years.
And I mean, it's interesting as well. They don't mention that this was supposed to be for the victorious powers. Would all have a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. So that's why France, Russia today, as the successors of the USSR, the USA and the UK all have permanent seats. But they also gave China's permanent seat because China was one of the victorious powers of World War II. But they gave that seat to Taiwan because, you know, anti-communism, and like the USA refused to accept
they gave it to the Republic
People's
of China.
Republic. Yes, but they refused to accept that the People's Republic even existed. So they were just like, yeah, Taiwan, the guys in Taiwan who didn't even do hardly any of the fighting and committed war crimes against the Chinese people in the mainland, who have now fled to Taiwan because they've lost the war, are the winners. So like, give them the seat. It's just such a ludicrous idea, like that literally never gets talked about in the West. It's quite funny, really, in some kind of twisted way.
Here we go. Potsdam Conference, July 1945, to put into action the post-war settlement agreement agreed at Yalta. Now, the British government have been replaced by apparent socialist / British imperialist Clement Attlee, right? Look at the picture and the new set of leaders present. How would this change in leadership affect relations between East and West? Capitalist answer, they're going to say loads, but in reality, it's just two capitalists and Stalin again. The main objective of the Potsdam Conference was to finalise a post-war settlement and put into action all the things agreed at Yalta. Whilst the meeting at Yalta had been reasonably friendly, the Potsdam Conference was fraught with disagreements, which were the result of some significant changes that had taken place since the Yalta Conference. Quote-unquote Western meddling. A new US President, the US President Franklin D. Roosevelt, had died and been replaced by his Vice President Truman. Whilst Roosevelt had been willing to work with Stalin largely because he needed the USSR to join the war against Japan, Truman made a little secret of his dislike for communism, and Stalin personally. It's pretty mean, isn't it? What
guys just helped you like beat the guy's just beating the Nazis for you. Like, what's your problem?
Personally, and you hate him personally.
Problem, Truman. Fucking dick.
Doesn't just hate what he does, he hates him personally. Like as if they've had like an argument over what, Pokemon cards or something, I don't know. Truman remarked,
I actually think I'm sure, I think it was Potsdam, it might have been Yalta, but at Potsdam I think like Stalin was sat there with Truman and Attlee, and Stalin was there with his son as well, and like I think it was at what's his name, fucking Truman was saying what would you do with the Nazis that we catch? How would you even ascertain like who was the Nazis or something like this? And Stalin, who was like quite pissed at the time, like as in drunk, like said something along the lines of, well, just round up all the officers and just shoot them all, like as a joke. And like Truman lost his mind and started like getting all fuming and that, and then apparently Stalin like clapped him on the back and said like, I'm only joking, old chap. Like that's such a hilarious like Soviet joke. It's like, execute all the Nazis, and it made Truman really angry.
Truman said,
I think, yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, I think he said something like execute like 100,000 German officers or 10,000 German officers, like something that Stalin didn't do, but like it made fucking Truman really angry, and like there was like Truman flew into a rage about it. Really funny.
There's a video here I'm not going to watch because of copyright reasons. The nuclear threat. Just before the conference began on July the 16th, 1945, the USA had successfully exploded an atomic bomb in the New Mexico desert. When first told about the success, Truman is said to have remarked, "If it works, I'll sure have a hammer on those boys." At Potsdam, Truman chose to inform Stalin that the US possessed a new weapon of unusual destructive force. Although Stalin already knew details about the Manhattan Project through his spy networks, there were Soviet spies in the Manhattan Project anyway. the Soviet Union had the best intelligence in the world at the turn of the 1900s, up till post-war. He was able to contain it, this treatment, and the fact that there were secrets between supposed allies.
I'd like to say that, like, socialist intelligence agencies have always been superior. Like, I mean, you know, the KGB has always been seen as like this terrifying threat to Americans. Like, they still talk about the KGB as if it's like, you know, Stalin era KGB. And like we saw only a couple of months ago, like China and helped Iran to kill all of the CIA assets in their respective countries. And then yesterday, I think on Twitter, we saw that thread about how the CIA is like seething that it can't spy on Xi Jinping because like Xi's anti-corruption campaign has made it impossible for the high-ranking officials to like pay off assets, and like all of the actual assets on the ground have just been executed. Like there is something to be said about socialist intelligence agencies, that they're just more effective.
The way that this is telling the Manhattan, like Stalin's just like, oh, you kept that a secret from us, did you? It's not that, is it? The atom bomb was developed to threaten the Soviets with, right? This history's been told is as if like, oh,
it's
Stalin
not just a gotcha.
Just found out about it and was like, oh, it's not too bad, you know. Don't worry about it. Let's just not have secrets between friends.
Yeah, we're literally talking about a world-ending weapon that you've just like created specifically to scare the Reds, and the Reds are like, yeah, we already knew about it, but like,
oh, thanks for not telling us. Despite agreeing at Yalta that free elections would be held in Eastern Europe after the defeat of Nazi Germany, there was little evidence at Potsdam that Stalin intended to allow them. You can just hear them like, getting annoyed at that.
And
in fact, the Red Army was in control of Poland, and the USSR was in the process of setting up a communist government. But this is the point, isn't it, right? They will lay this history down as so arbitrary, as if it's just like the flick of a switch. The Soviets just set up a communist government and that's it now. Nobody can do anything about it, right? It's ridiculous, isn't it? Poland was set up by the Soviet Union, but then was allowed to be independent. That's not how it works, is it? It's just not how logic works. It sounds like the USSR people, the Polish people, were like, yeah, we'll just govern the way that the winners have governed, because that seems like it beats fascism. Oh, you're telling no fascists around here anymore? Cool, let's do that. Let's set you up. The way that they tell the history is so ludicrous.
I mean, the thing is, as well,
the problem is they're telling on themselves, because capitalists have to set up a capitalist government. They have to go and find some people willing to like be paid off.
Be compradors. Yeah.
Exactly. Do we want to look up at these facts about Truman? I don't think so. Outcome. Here we go. No, that's such a revision tip. Let's carry on. Let's find something more.
Revision tip. Make sure you always lie about fucking the Soviet Union. That's how to revise. It's worked for years.
The official US justification for the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs was to force the Japanese government to surrender, which it did on August 14th, 1945. Some historians... That's fundamentally untrue. No, it's not. Some historians have speculated that the bombs might also have had another purpose, to send a warning to the Soviet Union about the strength of the American arsenal. That statement is very true. The atomic bomb
statement's true.
The atomic bomb was... No, because the US wanted to control... The Japanese surrendered to the US and the US alone, which meant that no other country on Earth, including the USSR and China, could sue and take part in the negotiations afterwards. The USA managed to control the entire surrender of Japan, right? So it's true. They wanted to force the Japanese government to surrender solely to the USA.
No.
And that's what happened.
That part is correct, but it's the implication that it was the atom bombs that did it, when it was actually the fact that the Soviet Union had troops in Sakhalin Island ready to invade, and like basically Manchuria, the Japanese puppet state, had just crumpled like a house of cards when the Red Army arrived. Like it crumbled. Soviet Union wiped out like 3 of the Imperial Japanese Army's like most competent fighting forces in like a week, and they were basically ready to march on the main Japanese islands essentially, and they would have done it and crushed Japan as they crushed Germany. But basically, like, they used the atom bomb as the justification to surrender to America. They didn't even care about the atom bombings, and this is why, because the firebombing of Tokyo, which is never talked about, killed far more people and did far more damage than both of the atom bombs combined. But one of the main issues with this, I mean, the Japanese were losing something like 20 cities a day to American firebombings. So when the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings happened, that was just 2 more cities. That was 2 out of 20 in a day. Like, they weren't concerned about losing cities or losing people, particularly, especially civilians. They didn't give a shit about civilians. They cared about being subjugated by the USSR and losing their emperor, their political system, which they still have intact today, because they know that if they surrendered to the USA solely, from the Japanese perspective, then they will be able to keep their system of governance, which they did. Yeah. I mean, but like it's passed as though like the Japanese saw the awesome power of the atom bomb and were like, wow, we need to surrender now. Not like the awesome power of like capitalism. A million fucking Soviet fucking soldiers on their border.
It's the awesome power of capitalism, right, that made them surrender solely to the US, because the US is like, look, you surrender to us alone and we'll be friendly towards you. Or, you know, Stalin's wanting to put half your government on trial.
Well, Stalin said he would have executed the emperor, which, like, that would have been like the ultimate fuck you to the Japanese empire. Obviously, would have seen his stuff. Go on, continue.
Despite the promises made by Stalin at the Yalta Conference to allow free elections, he in fact stated turning Eastern Europe into a buffer zone between the USSR and Western Europe.
Buffer zone, eh?
Yeah, buffer zone. So racist, isn't it, towards these nations that just apparently. Basically, what this propaganda is saying is the people in these nations are mindless drones that exist as a buffer zone, right?
They're just a meat shield to absorb American tanks in the event of an invasion.
Stalin feared that Eastern Europe could be a doorway for an attack on the Soviet Union by the West. I mean, Stalin was right. You just like decided that you're not going to leave Berlin so you can fly.
Well, I mean, I'm not being funny, but we just saw the Nazis using Eastern Europe as a doorway to Russia. It's not like there isn't historical precedent to this. This happened like 4 years, not even 4 years, like 2 years prior to Stalin making this propaganda assessment of the geopolitical realities of Europe and the fucking Eastern European plain. He saw this happen, so why would he not think that would happen again? Like, what kind of fucking nonsense is this? Who's believing this shit? It's insane.
Albania, a communist government, took power at the end of World War II.
Good old Hoja.
All these countries are just ones that got bullied by Nazis as bad as the USSR as well. And the Nazis went after just like working class people.
And that was one thing I was going to say before when you were talking about Poland. Like, they didn't mention once that like almost the entirety of the atrocities of the fucking Holocaust, and the majority of the fucking Jews that were killed were like Polish Jews. Like, why wouldn't they turn away from capitalism, which was the driving fucking economic system of Nazi Germany, and into socialism? Like, why would a puppet government buffer zone need to be established by Stalin? Like, none of this makes any sense when you analyze it like through a critical lens, does it? It's just all bullshit.
Exactly.
It's mad.
Are you going to side with the people who chased the Nazis away and suddenly just be like, no, actually, I'm not interested in those people that came and saved my village. I'm now interested in the American, and it's all about freedom and democracy for me. It's just so ludicrous, isn't it? Bulgaria, in 1946, the Bulgarian monarchy was abolished. Oh no! And later year, a communist government was elected, and it gradually eradicated its opponents. What via popular support was that? And the fact that no opponent could get a foot in anywhere. East Germany.
No, I think the opponents in Bulgaria were like literally fascists. Like they were fascist parties, so a lot of them were like collaborators.
We've had a look at some of that as well, haven't we? writings on that. But anyway, East Germany was part of the Soviet Union zone of occupation, agreed at the Yalta Conference, and in 1945 the Soviets set up a communist regime. Yeah, of course they did. Romania, in the 1945 elections, a communist-led coalition government was elected. I thought this is what they wanted, right? The communists gradually removed their coalition partners and abolished Romanian monarchy.
Didn't they say like 2 pages ago? Didn't they say that like no evidence of elections happened, and they just instated communist governments? But now every single one of these governments is being described as being elected, like literally 2 pages later.
Fearing that a non-communist government would be elected in 1947, Stalin invited 16 non-communist politicians to Moscow, where they were arrested. With their political opponents removed, the Polish communists won the election. Were those... I mean, even if that were true, right? If Stalin invited 16 members of UKIP to Russia, so they couldn't take part in the British elections, that'd be pretty based, wouldn't it? Oh no, fascists got tricked into a holiday and missed the election. What dumbasses? Do you know what I mean? Psych. That's all that is. Good. That's not really anything nefarious, is it? You get invited there.
I mean, that just sounds like something they've invented as well, because I've literally never heard that assertion before. Like, normally you've these anti-communist assertions...
Yeah, but the thing is, Tom, it's probably true, right? And the 16 non-communist politicians that they invited to Moscow were probably fucking collaborators that were wanted for, like, working at a death camp or something. And they got arrested. It's not telling you the context, is it, of these non-communist politicians? Quote, unquote. And in Hungary, although non-communists won the 1945 election, a communist politician, Rakowski, took control of the secret police and used it to arrest... No.
They're talking about the fascist coup there, aren't they?
Took control of the secret police and used it to arrest and execute his political opponents. By 1948, the Communist Party was in complete control of the country.
Fantastic.
Exactly.
I don't see anything wrong with that.
Good. Czechoslovakia was the last country in Eastern Europe to fully fall to communism. The language is so biased. It's for kids.
They don't say fall to democracy, do they?
Exactly. It's so biased. In 1948, elections that year, only communists were allowed to stand, and a communist government was duly elected. These historical bite-sized facts are all taken from like Daily Mail articles from the time as well.
That's just patently not true as well, because like almost every single one of these quote unquote communist countries, which were all socialist, but there's no point even going into that discussion, were like all ran by like united fronts of like non-Nazi parties, like 10 socialist parties generally. Exactly. Everything from like centre left to like Marxism, Leninism, and they just excluded like fascist and fascist collaborators. Like, why is that a bad thing after what you've just witnessed in World War II?
Exactly.
What the fuck?
Exactly. It's usually the case in all these cases, isn't it? That like it's not the Soviet Union creating a government. It's just that the USSR was like, why don't all your left parties create a coalition of left parties, and you will be bigger than the right. And then
that's literally what happened
you'll get
with
bigger and bigger, because
with East Germany.
Well, like exactly. It's happened not just in every country. Go on, carry on.
With East Germany, they set up the United Front, which I think was like seven or eight communist, not even communist parties, 7 or 8 parties, one of which was the Communist Party, like 6 of which were like fucking centre-left fucking liberal socialist parties, all that kind of bullshit. And they won against like the fucking... The essentially the West German party, like the Reunification under Democracy Party or whatever, and won the election. And they were like, okay, cool, that gives us a mandate to start creating a fucking workers' state. Like, what is this logic? Like, it's so fucking backwards and racist. It is racist, isn't it? It's just like anything that's like Eastern is bad.
Yeah.
And imposed.
Yeah. Funny you should say that, because the horror film, a Serbian film, it's quite a disgusting film. That's like got that's got like an artistic message about like Eastern Europe being portrayed like that, all the time to make like anti-Soviet sort of. It's that Slav trope, isn't it, that they go for. Anyway, look at number 2 here. This is really honest. Under the Marshall Plan, the USA, this is what I was talking about earlier, where they convince proletarians that they're the same as a capitalist by giving them nice plastic things. Under the Marshall Plan, the USA supplied goods to German shops for workers to buy. This was a nice way of showing the communists that America's capitalist economy was flourishing. It's so funny.
So it wasn't showing that the economy was flourishing, it was showing that you were artificially increasing demand as a way to demonstrate the failures of post-war Soviet socialism.
Yes.
That's literally what it was.
Yeah.
It's there's nothing nice about that.
They're telling on themselves.
It's quite evil when you think about it.
And here you go, look, why else would Stalin be angry about this? Why on earth would Stalin and the USSR and the world socialist movement be angry about this? Listen, at a meeting in London in January 1948, Britain and the USA joined their zones together to create Bizonia and make it easier to administer them. France would later join, and they changed the name to West Germany. I wonder why Stalin was annoyed at the West turning Germany back into like a capitalist fascist breeding ground where you've given political jobs to all the Nazis. It's just ludicrous, isn't it?
And I mean, like, the whole assertion of the fucking Potsdam Conference was Yalta even, I think it was when Germany was.
But also, don't forget
dissected into 4 parts, which would limit the influence of one specific partner in any of the 4 regions, and each of the both Britain and France were far more impacted by Nazi aggression than the USA was at any point in time, because the USA was its partner and inspiration. But the fact that they literally bent their knee to America so as to create a greater zone of influence to combat Soviet socialism, and they're just like, why are the Soviets mad? This is a good thing. It's fucking insanity.
Yeah.
Even if you take away the fact that it was like a breeding ground for fascism, which is what you've just said, which is completely true, purely from a geopolitical angle, that is a dickhead move. That is an aggressive move.
But you're talking about the Soviets are the ones always the aggressor, but that's an aggressive move. It's an aggressive move by the West, because you've said, well, we'll split. We've agreed at a conference to keep Germany in 4, so it can never become Nazi again. And then as soon as like you're away from any sort of responsibility to that deal, you just create a new country. But this article as well, as if it's like Stalin's personally upset. Stalin is personally upset, right? But it's not Stalin that's upset about this. It's East Germany, the government of East Germany, that's upset, right? And then, by extension, the rest of the Warsaw
Europe,
Pact, the west of the Warsaw Pact countries, because that's called solidarity. So of course, Stalin as leader of the USSR is going to make comment on this. It's not that Stalin was, but he's framed as if Stalin's in control. Yeah, of course Stalin's upset about this, but it's the East German government that's been fighting it, not Stalin. Carry on. Like it says here, look, on June 24th, Stalin cut land access to Berlin for the Allies. No, Stalin didn't. The East German government did, right?
Yeah, as a direct response to this fucking forced annexation of the fucking French and British zones by the Americans, because Britain and France were both heavily indebted to America at this point in time.
Well, they were both Marshall Plan recipients as well, so...
Yeah, of course. So every country in the European continent essentially has to abide by the American will, because the American war machine's the only one that's not been completely and utterly destroyed by this entire massive war. So any country that opposes American will just be fucking occupied, and then they're surprised when the East Germans go, no, we're not allowing you to continue to fucking have access to us, so-called Berlin, after you've just fucked over the entire East German state. It's fucking insanity.
This part here is quite telling. Stalin was powerless to stop the Berlin airlift. Wherever it says Stalin, just see it as like the Socialist International. The Stalin was powerless to stop the Berlin airlift. To shoot down the planes would have provoked World War III, and at this stage, unlike the USA, the USSR did not have nuclear weapons. Now, this is the difference, like, between now and then, isn't it? Back then, the USA and Britain, or whatever, the capitalists, could just fly planes into occupied areas of capitalist occupied areas of little capitalism that they've created, and nobody could do anything about it because, like it says there, the USSR didn't have nuclear weapons. As soon as they get them, it stops, doesn't it?
They're literally saying there that America was about to sledge bomb the USSR with nuclear weapons in response to the shooting down of a fucking plane.
Supply plane.
Like,
exactly.
What,
yeah, exactly.
What kind of lunatic like escalation is that? Like, I mean, even if you accept the American view that they used atom bombs on Imperial Japan so as to end the war, which we've already discussed is patently false. Like, they had a massive war with Japan before they even got to the stage of using nuclear weapons against them. Like, they were literally willing to sledgehammer the fuck out of the USSR for any minor provocation at all, like a tiny provocation. It's insane. And they're literally showing their whole ass by just admitting it here, saying we were about to nuke them, so they couldn't do a shit. It's fucking crazy.
What was it says here, look, elections in Germany, blah blah blah, I don't know enough about this, but what was this guy doing between the years 1930 to 1945? I'd like to know that. Somebody in the chat will probably tell us. Was he a Nazi or not? I mean, if Escher was still here, she'd demonstrate. Number 3, Konrad Adenauer and the Christian Democrat.
Oh, I'm pretty sure he was a Nazi. I'm almost certain he was. Adenauer.
If not, he will have had them underneath him anyway, you know. The formation of NATO was the aftermath, which we were talking about right at the start of the show. As an alliance of countries around the North Atlantic for their mutual defence. Basically, if the Soviet Union was to attack one of these planes, the whole World War III would start. That's basically what that is, isn't it? The foundation of NATO. The USSR responded to the formation of NATO with the Warsaw Pact in May 1955. Similarly, an alliance of the communist countries of Eastern Europe for their mutual defence. Finally, on August 29th, the USSR exploded its first atom bomb, and there you go, the nuclear had no longer had nuclear monopoly. Alright, we're nearly at the end of this.
Yeah, I'm just reading, trying to find out if he was. Konrad Adenauer was born in 1876, January 1876, right? So he would have lived his whole adult life through the Nazi occupation of Germany, the Nazi, consolidation of Germany, and it doesn't seem like he's mentioned at all here. So, like, what was he doing during the war years? Why does nothing to say? Like, that's very peculiar, because if he was like a leading, like, anti-government, Adenauer belied his age by his intense work habits and his uncanny political instinct. He displayed a strong dedication to a broad vision of market-based democracy and anti-communism. Curious.
That part of the article was boring. Space race. USA, there's a timeline. The USA in 1945 drops an atom bomb on Japanese cities, blah blah blah. 1949, the USSR first atomic bomb ends nuclear monopoly. UK 1950. 52, first hydrogen bomb. 53, USSR hydrogen bomb. Blah blah. Okay, it's kind of simplistic. I can't be bothered to go into it. The Hungarian uprising, to end the article. This is the fascist uprising, right? November
Yeah,
1956.
that was where tankies came from. The Hungarian uprising.
Yeah, well, this is why it's thrown in, isn't it? It's got to be thrown into the Western propaganda for Trotskyists to remember, for when students float left a little bit, so they can become anti-Stalinists. In November 1956, Soviet tanks invaded Hungary, a country that was already under its control. The Hungarian people took to the streets to fight the Soviet Red Army. There's something not quite right about that first sentence when you think about it logically. Soviet tanks invaded Hungary. They invaded Hungary, a country that was already under its control. So the Soviet Union already controlled Hungary, but they invaded it. That's not an invasion, really, is it?
I'm almost certain as well that like it was in the Soviet tanks were invited in by the actual.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at.
government.
That's what it sounds like to me, right? It sounds like the Soviets had influence over Hungary because they were socialist allies, aka they had solidarity with each other.
Well, hang on a minute. If
And
surely the Hungarians were just a buffer part of the buffer state.
Oh,
you know?
Of course,
so
yeah, mindless buffer state.
But if they're part of the buffer state, then surely that means that they are part of the USSR in this fucking nonsense's opinion. So like, how do you invade your own territory? That's the interesting one.
Why were Hungarian people unhappy? What were they fighting to defend? Blah, blah, blah. Non-communists won the 1945 election. By 1948, the communists had taken over by control of the secret police and the limited...
No, fascist.
Yeah, so basically there was a resistance who cleared out the post-war remnants of the fascist government. Hungarians had no freedom of speech, created a climate of fear, arresting anyone who spoke out about communism, aka what, they were fascist. Even something as simple as listening to Western music could lead to an arrest. I wonder what the Western music was, though, that one case of propaganda that they probably got that from. And I wonder if it was like white nationalist music. It probably was. I'd bet that it was. Thousands of Soviet troops and officials were stationed in Hungary, which were a drain on the Hungarian economy. Why? Creating economic order.
No further explanation needed. It's not relevant to the
So are you saying that are you saying that the thousands of Allied troops and officials that were stationed in Iraq were a drain on the Iraqi economy? Because I mean, they were more than just stationed there, right? They created a lot more damage. Surely they were a drain on the Iraqi economy, right? Let's be honest. Russian language being forced upon the people. With Hungarian.
That's called lingua franca.
A classic. Anyway, 1956, the new Soviet leader Khrushchev made an important speech to leading communists at a closed meeting. This had been known as the Khrushchev. See, this is why this is in there. It's for the Trotskyists. It's for the left-leaning members of the class. The secret speech, which he said, but what he said did not remain a secret. Wink, wink. He denounced many of Stalin's crimes and human rights abuses. Blah blah, outlined in his de-Stalinization policy. Blah blah blah. This speech had an impact in Hungary. During 1956, the Hungarian people began to protest against Radowski's regime. Fascist.
What about Charles de Gaulle's regime?
Fascist regime.
People protesting against that.
Here we go. Here's the telling one. His reforms included farmers to be allowed private ownership of their land, aka capitalism, right?
Kulaks.
It's just there.
The rebirth of the Kulak class, and they're like, yeah, this is a good thing. Mm-hmm. We love kulaks. Mm-hmm. Fuck's sake.
So Khrushchev created this problem, and then Khrushchev refused to accept Hungary leaving the Warsaw Pact. Blah blah blah. Thousands of Soviet tanks and soldiers entered Hungary to crack down.
It's interesting that they don't mention why thousands of tanks would be needed if it was just like a protest. Like, you don't need thousands of tanks to put down a protest, do you? You need thousands of tanks to put down a fucking fascist uprising, which was what was happening. Communists being literally fucking lynched in the streets, fucking their heads smashed in. I think it was is it Brezhnev's wife? It was one of the leading communist leaders from the Soviet Union later on, was in Hungary at the time of the fascist coup, and his wife basically saw communists being like skinned alive and shit in the streets, and she had a complete mental breakdown. I think it was Brezhnev, but don't quote me on that one. And as a result of her mental breakdown, she literally never recovered and was like a broken shell of herself for the rest of her life because of the horrors she saw the fascists do in the streets of Hungary, in the streets of Budapest. So like, as you would, yeah, correctly so. So like, I don't even know why it's controversial to like say that crushing Nazis with tanks is a good thing. Like that shouldn't be controversial, especially just after World War II.
Here's the crutch. The UN declared its disgust, blah blah blah. Communist parties in some Western European countries like Italy, Britain and France began to change their opinion of the USSR. That's Trotskyism, right? No military intervention to support the Hungarian rebels. And that's the end of British high school education on the Cold War. It's very basic, isn't it? And it's telling in places. But if you were to read that as somebody who doesn't know the context and you're just doing it because you've got to pass an exam, right? And it's not something you're interested in or even want to learn about, you're just going to retain that information to pass the test, aren't you? That's the idea with it, isn't it?
I mean, as we pointed out multiple times as well, like the skeleton of it is like true. Like they got all of the key points right. The things that
but
happen,
like I say, if you don't know the context or the complete picture, you can't realize that what they're saying is true, but it's actually bias. You just take it at face value instead of looking at the context of that comment. And it does link in with that idea. Links in with the article that you picked at the start when we're talking about why the US would set up these legal groups and then not stick to them themselves and stuff. It ties in with that, doesn't it? Because they know there's nobody to hold them to account, because people are getting this one side of history that the Gulf of Tonkin happened, right? So therefore it's okay for a Western country to intervene. There's a weird phenomenon, isn't there, in the West, and I think it's because of individualism, which is to turn on and off whether somebody is a member of the proletariat or not for the sake of an argument, maybe. Do you get what I mean? Just because, what I'm trying to say is, just because somebody believes or thinks or is indoctrinated with the capitalist version of history doesn't make them a capitalist, right? But that's what I'm trying to get at. So they're still a proletarian. They're just a badly educated one. But I think people in the West are too quick to. Western communists, in certain examples, are too quick to castigate rather than try to educate. I guess there's a fine line, because some people just aren't willing. You can show them the truth, like we were talking about earlier with Molotov-Ribbentrop. You can show them that other countries had the same pacts, and you can be like, well, what about Neville Chamberlain, right? And they will not compare the two on the same with the same standard, right? Because of this education that they've already received.
That's completely right. I mean, I think as well, it's the kind of the whole idea of this kind of obfuscation of the facts is the intention of the whole thing. I mean, like these people aren't being malicious 99% of the time. Like, very few people are genuinely reactionary because they believe in the reactionary views. It just tends to be as a direct result of this education, which is why this education is so bare bones. I mean, and the capitalists know that, because if they tell people the truth, people will be like, holy shit, we're the bad guys. what
Well, yeah, exactly.
we are the bad guys,
Did
and then they'll overthrow their government.
This idea in the West that Nazi Germany, like, well, how did that happen? What could have been the conditions for that? Well, they just didn't tell people the truth, right? And slowly seeped fascism under the cover, and then before you know it, they're just, well, before you don't even know it, because like you say, the flow of information was blocked off from a lot of people, so they would get the propaganda, right? Ignorance and just stupidity, I guess, and not being able, not stupidity, ignorance, and actually physically not being able to access the other side of the story or the full context is what creates fascism, isn't it? Undialectical process of information. It's the difference, isn't it? And as the
thing is, it makes sense for a socialist state like the USSR to tell the truth, because the vast majority of the people it will be educating are proletarians, so it's within their interest to know the truth, whereas capitalists are fighting a losing battle, which is why they never say capitalism nowadays, and they say democracy and stuff like this. They use all these kind of flowery words to hide the system that they're actually promulgating, because you can't say we want to spread capitalism to these countries because that sounds evil, because it is evil. They say we want to spread democracy, which sounds nicer, so it gets the masses broadly on side. It makes sense for people to be kept stupid in a capitalist system because it benefits the capitalists, because there are fewer capitalists than there are. It's the whole idea of a bug's life, isn't it? That we are the ants, and if the ants realize that they outnumber the bugs or whatever, the fucking wasps, locusts, whatever they are, then the locusts, then the ants will overthrow the locusts, and that is literally the situation you've got in capitalism today, where manufacture this level of stupidity whilst giving the illusion to these people that they're actually educating them so that they can feel smart and don't feel inferior to the socialists when the socialists come and talk to them. And this kind of level of artificially created self-righteousness that is pumped into these systems, like as you said earlier, by saying, all you need to do is say this to get an A. If you get an A, you think I'm smart, so you don't need to question it anymore. You've already got an A. You're exactly at the pinnacle of the knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. You got the top version of history. Nobody can tell you any different. It's It's a meme in the UK, isn't it? A-levels politics students who think they know it all because they've got an A in A-level politics, which is the idiots. You're not even out of the cave yet. You just got an A in telling us what the shadows are in the allegory of the cave, right? It's that, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
That's why socialism is so dangerous, because it's the act of education, isn't it, that Lenin and Mao did. That's why they won, because they went around. It's not a coincidence. They went and here, we'll teach you how to read. It's not a coincidence. Like all these feudal states had like kind of levels of literacy, like under 30%, generally speaking. And then like when a socialist revolution happened, like in Cuba, like in Russia, like in China, the literacy level went up to like near 99% in every single one of these countries, because it was a necessity to educate the vast majority of the population, because you need the vast majority of the population on your side. And like, this is what Esh is always like, it's real things that really happened. I mean, Esh drives the point home when she's like, Lenin used to pay, if you couldn't read in the Bolshevik times, then Lenin would pay like a schoolboy who could read to come and read to the workers, because they can read themselves. Exactly. It's like a real process. It's not just something that's done. I think that's a problem with Westerners as well, isn't it? All this stuff, you're telling the story of Stalin, and it's a story in the same way that Game of Thrones is a story. Something distant off there. It's part of the Western. What's the word? The
mythology.
Yeah, the mythology of the West is that history's over there and done with, isn't it? So it's not something real that's happened, whereas to Russians, that's the history of Yunnan being able to read. Like,
exactly, yeah.
I mean, I think it's funny that when she's saying no, it's not the end of history, that that's him basically saying fuck off to capitalists, right? With your idea that like history is something separate to now because it's over. That's the difference, isn't it?
I think many capitalists did many Westerners, not even capitalists, but many Westerners did genuinely believe Fukuyama when he said, history has ended.
Certainly liberals, because neoliberalism is the idea that you can stop the earth spinning, right? It's why
you've already attained perfect system.
It's why climate change is such a cause for liberals at the minute, because it's easy for them to latch on and feel good about it, isn't it? Because we're just restoring things to how they were, right? So therefore good. They can play it like that, and it also manages to hide that they're responsible for the damage, whereas socialists are just like, nah, we're just going to clear you out and actually throw you into the dustbin of history. We're going to let you reverse it back to before capitalists built cities and in massive factories everywhere, right, and tarmacked the entire planet and stuff. Do you know what I mean? It's not the proletariat that did that. But anyway, I think that's about it for this week.
Yeah, I think I might have to go back to sleep for a little bit. It's now 8 a.m. in the glorious People's Republic, and I'm starting to yawn again. So I think I might have to. My breakfast just arrived from the quarantine.
Is that them banging on the door then?
It was them banging, yeah. Could you hear? They don't fuck around.
Get your
breakfast. Like that. Bang! Outan! Fucking hell! All right, coming.
Nice. Right. We'll be back next week with a podcast a week on Friday. You're still going to be in quarantine, aren't you? So you'll be there.
Yes.
Sammy will be back as well.
If he's not busy being out and about.
He'll be back for his own show. Don't worry about it. And then we got Harrison joining us if he's not having beef with Twitch debaters or whatever he does in his spare time. Right, let me do all the promo stuff. There's merch. If you want a link to it, you can send us a DM and we'll hook you up with that. It's just a bit of fun, helps us keep going, pays us bills. If you don't like merch but you do like spending, there's a Patreon you can join, and if you join one of the two middle tiers, actually the top two tiers, you've got no choice but to receive merch because it sends it you automatically. So there you go. You also get access to the Discord.
Commodification for you.
You also get access to the Discord, which we have hangouts on when there's quite a few of us on, or when we've got guests. So you can come and hang out with whoever was on the show and us if you like hanging out with YouTubers. We've got a couple of articles in the works. We've got another one published recently about climate change, because that's the hot topic. So go and read that on our website. Don't forget, you can also press join below. If you press join below, you get an emoji, so you can look like Mass Casualty does in the chat where he has an emoji next to his YouTube name. If you join any of that stuff or buy merch or anything, by the way, send us a message and we'll give you access to the Discord for doing it. Don't forget to follow Escher as well on Twitter. Historically, you'll see on our feed, we'll be retweeting it. You can get to her through the advert for this show. Tom, say bye. Anything you want to say?
No, not really. See you all next week. Next Friday, is it, or Thursday?
Next Friday.
I've lost all track of time. Every day is just a number to me right now. So yeah, okay. See you all Friday.
Are you scratching the days onto the wall like a prisoner?
I've actually got a little paper pad which I'm doing tallies on. I'm on day 20 today, so only 2 days left in Beijing now, and then I've got to do a further 2-week quarantine in Wuhan. But yeah. Nice.
Well, just let this music play as per.